Hey there, thanks so much for joining me again on a live stream here. This is going to be on the topic of combining instances that are preserved with decoupled. And here's really what it comes down to. If you are somebody who uses VE Pro, but you want a way to have sort of a general library that's just always available, and you also want to use instruments occasionally that you don't really want to build into your template, but they're just there for this particular project. Furthermore, you want to make sure that they're preserved with that project file. So if you open that file, 8 or 9 months down the road, that everything's going to load up correctly in VE Pro. You can actually do that, and I think it is something which is certainly well documented with VE Pro, but takes a little while to get your head wrapped around. But it's such an important part of my workflow, and I've been using it a lot lately, so I thought I would just take time to guide you through how I'm doing it and what the benefits are, and hopefully help anybody out there who might be in a similar situation get more out of it. Okay, so on Monday, I actually did a stream. This was January 6th. About what decoupled and preserved instances are in VE Pro. I'm going to give you like sort of the 5 or 10 second summary of that. Essentially, preserved instances stay open when you close your DAW or you close Dorico. They stay open in VE Pro waiting for another connection. Coupled means that the DAW or Dorico, I'm going to refer to Dorico as a DAW from here on out just to keep it consistent, that when you close your DAW, the DAW actually retrieves all the settings and saves them. That's what coupled means. If you decouple it, it means the DAW is not saving any of the configurations. So that's essentially what it means, but these can actually be used in combination, and it's a really effective workflow. Now I've got a project open here that I'm going to just kind of walk you through a little bit. I've got this, it's got xylophone, marimba, harp, piano, violin. Those things are very normal for me. They're part of my standard orchestral template, and I use them all the time. What I don't use all the time are these three settings, or these three instruments here: Kitara, Haifa, which is kind of like a synth keyboard instrument from Native Instruments. Kitara is kind of a newer instrument from them. It's sort of mallet and guitar based, but it's sort of an affected, processed instrument. And then Schema Light, which is really a pattern generating sort of phrase oriented instrument. So I don't really want to have any of those, especially the Schema Light pattern oriented instrument, as part of my main template, because I'm going to use a pattern in this project that I probably won't use in my next project, right? So in the individual project, especially with phrase based instruments, it's really helpful to make sure that Dorico is remembering, or your DAW, if you're producing in a DAW directly, that it's remembering the configuration for which preset of your phrase-based instrument, in this case Schema Light, that you want to have loaded. That's where you want to have something coupled, and you also basically want to make sure that, well, that you want to have it coupled. With my other instruments here, xylophone, marimba, things like that, that are part of my standard template, violin, I don't want to have those coupled because I don't actually change settings on those. If I change a setting, it's because it's improving that instrument forever. I might change a level setting, or I might find that I have to create an EQ on that particular instrument in order to make sure that it blends well in the future. But anyway, it would be a change or a modification, a setting that I would set in that instrument that I would probably want to have that persist forever. It's fine to just have that saved in my VE Pro project file. I don't need Dorico to remember that. And just as a quick summary for anybody who missed my video on January 6th, one of the reasons you want to think carefully about this is that every time Dorico or your DAW has to go out to VE Pro and retrieve all those settings and then save them in the file, it takes time. And if you're not really saving any settings or changing any settings, that's a waste of time. I often find myself in my workflow switching between Dorico and Cubase, and it really helps that a lot of my instances are preserved. So Let's look at this demo a little bit more and see how it's set up so it can help you understand what's going on. So I've got here in my setup, let's look at Kitara. I've got that set up in an instance right here. It's called, I just called it Delicate Momentum because that's the name of this particular piece I'm working on. All right, so I just created it, but you could call it ad hoc. I mean, that's basically what it is an ad hoc collection of whatever. And I have it here and it's open, and you see how it's italicized, like the title is italicized and this lock is undone. If I do that lock, that says preserve it, keep it open even after I closed Orco, and you can see that the font becomes sort of standard. If it's unlocked and it's unpreserved, that means that that's indicated by the italics, and it means that when I close Dorico, it's going to close it over here. It's going to actually retrieve all of the information. Right now, I have the coupling is on, meaning this is actually a button for decoupling, and since I haven't engaged decoupling, it is a coupled instance. That means that it's not preserved. It's going to close when I close Darko, but Darko is going to get all the settings from here. So if I go ahead, let's just demonstrate this, and I'm going to go ahead and just close this project. And we're going to see that this instance over here disappeared. And now I've got this project right here. Now we're going to see that it loads it back up over here. There it goes. It creates the instance. It's going to name it after whatever I named it in the Darko file. And it's taking a little while here because it's actually reloading these files. And this is a good example of why decoupling and preserving can be really effective, because if you are, let's put myself back on the screen, if you are coupling everything, then it takes quite a long time to load up, and you can imagine how much time that wastes. Decoupling saves a lot of time. It's just that if you made settings for this specific project, you've lost them when you close your DAW. So I don't want to do that. What I want is, especially with this Schema Lite, which is a pattern-oriented instrument, and I'll just play this for you a little bit so you can kind of hear what it sounds like. Hey Shubis, thanks very much for joining me today. Right, so I've got this pattern down here in the Schema Lite instrument. It sounds like this. That's what it's doing. But that is not a pattern that I'm using it for this particular project. It's not something that I'm going to be using on every project. If I come back and use this instrument again 3 months from now, I'm almost certainly going to choose a different pattern, or I'm going to build my own pattern that's unique to that project. Anytime it's unique to the project, I would suggest don't preserve it and make sure it's coupled. If it's not unique to the project, then you probably want it to be preserved. And if it's not unique to the project and you don't make any changes to it, then you'd want it to also be decoupled, so preserved and decoupled. Now, a good example of something that I'm using in this project that is preserved and decoupled is my Violin 1. So if we go to Violin 1 in this project, and we look at the instrument there, I guess it was actually not connected, so let me just connect it to my strings. So this icon here says it's decoupled, all right, and this lock icon means that it is preserved. So what this means is that although right now I can get violin sounds out of the track, this project is not going to save any settings about my violin over here, and also when I close Darko, the violin's still going to stay open here. So I've got that up here in my instance called strings main. Got the violin right here. All right, it's running a sine player. And if I, let me just, take a little example here and just copy and paste that in there. So I've got this. Very simple example, but the key is that this instrument here, the violin, it is preserved so that when I close Dorico, it's going to stay open, and that means that I can access it from another DAW if I'm using Logic or Pro Tools, and I can access it from Cubase, which I often do in my workflow where I want to go to Cubase after this. I want to make sure I'm using the same violin, and I don't want to have to go through the process of loading it up again. Generally, what I will do with the, let's talk a little bit about how do I transfer these sort of project-only things into Cubase or into whatever DAW you're using, because once I close this project, since the instances from VE Pro are not preserved, they're going to disappear. They've saved in the file, but if the Dorico file is not open, they're not going to be there. So what do I do? With those, I generally will actually export. I do export the MIDI for all of the standard instruments, and I bring that into Cubase as MIDI. But I'll export the sort of project-only stuff as audio. And then I'll bring that in to Cubase's audio, so Cubase doesn't have to connect to that instance that was not preserved. So that's how I kind of work around that workflow. Let me summarize the principles that I think people should take away if they want to understand how to combine preserved instances and coupled or decoupled instances. If you are using it only in your project and you don't think it's something that you're going to really need incorporated into your template, then it should not be preserved and it should be coupled. Okay? If it is something that you know you're going to be using again and again and again, like a violin, and you also are going to be, well, I'll break it into two steps. If it's something you're going to use all the time, it should be preserved. If it's also something that you don't make a lot of changes to, which I don't do with any of my orchestral instruments really on a per project basis, then it should also be decoupled. The advantage there is you're going to have way faster load and save times. Now, if you have questions about this, please post them in the comments. I am going to be coming back on Friday. I'm actually out of town on Friday, but I'm going to post a video to publish that day that's about using compressors in orchestral music. And it's sort of building on a lesson I did in the end of last year on using EQ to mix for orchestra. So I hope you check that out. If you have comments on that video, this video, suggestions on topics you want me to cover, please let me know. You can let me know in the comments. You can also look on the community tab and post there on my channel page. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. I'll be out of town. You'll see my video on Friday. Hope you have a good rest of the week. And bye for now.